The underground tunnels beneath the city had always held a certain mystique, a hidden world of forgotten history and eerie silence. People said the air itself felt different down there, as if weighed down by the secrets of decades past. But for Alex, these tunnels were a place of exploration, an escape from the monotony of life above ground. He'd been exploring these places for years, and the dangers and superstitions that others warned of were just stories to him. On this particular night, Alex was supposed to meet his partner, Dmitri, for yet another excursion into the subterranean labyrinth of Moscow. The plan was simple: meet up, descend through one of the old ventilation shafts, and document what they found. But Dmitri was late. An hour passed, and his phone remained dead, no calls, no messages. Frustrated and impatient, Alex decided to go in alone. As he descended, a nagging thought crossed his mind. In the underground world, there were rules that weren't written down but were whispered among explorers. Rules like never going alone, never ignoring strange sounds, and never disrespecting the spirits said to linger in the depths. Alex dismissed these thoughts as superstitions, but they stayed with him as he climbed down the shaft, feeling the walls close in around him with each rung. He reached the second balcony, a platform where explorers usually took a breather before continuing down. The mine shaft stretched far below, the bottom obscured by shadows even with his powerful flashlight. It was as if the darkness at the bottom was alive, absorbing the light, resisting his attempts to see further. Then, breaking the silence, he heard it, a faint, blood-curdling scream echoing up from the depths. It was the scream of a woman, filled with terror and desperation. Alex froze, gripping the ladder as his heart pounded in his chest. He strained to listen, but the scream didn't repeat. Was it his mind playing tricks? Or was there truly someone down there? His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to leave. But Alex's curiosity overpowered his fear. Steeling himself, he took a deep breath and continued his descent, not knowing that he was making a terrible mistake. The deeper Alex went, the colder and damper the air became, as if the walls themselves were weeping. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the ladder under his weight. He finally reached the bottom of the shaft and stepped off, adjusting his flashlight to survey his surroundings. The underground tunnel stretched out before him, a narrow corridor with old transformer cabinets along one side, relics of the subway's infrastructure. He shined his flashlight around, seeing nothing but walls and shadows. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he took a few cautious steps forward, a chill ran down his spine. The shadows on the wall, they were moving, but not in the way shadows should. They seemed to have a life of their own, writhing and twisting in unnatural shapes, as if they were dancing to some sinister rhythm. Alex's breath hitched as he watched the shadows grow darker, more defined, transforming into eerie figures that resembled people. People frozen in grotesque postures of agony and despair. Suddenly, another scream echoed through the tunnel, closer this time, sharp and unrelenting. Alex stumbled backward, his eyes darting from side to side, searching for the source. He pointed his flashlight toward the cabinets, and that's when he saw them. Figures, darker than the darkness itself, slowly creeping along the walls, their forms twisting and expanding. Panicked, he began to back away, his footsteps echoing in the silence. But as he moved, so did they, closing in, inch by inch, their shadowy limbs stretching toward him. He turned and sprinted back to the ladder, his mind filled with one desperate thought: get out. But as he climbed, a new terror settled over him. He realized that he was no longer alone. Alex climbed the ladder as fast as his trembling hands would allow, his heart pounding as he ascended, driven by primal fear. The chill intensified, wrapping around him like a deathly shroud. He could feel something behind him, a dark, oppressive presence breathing down his neck, making the hair on his arms stand on end. He tried not to look back, but his mind couldn't resist imagining the horror that lurked behind him. A figure, silent and malevolent, watching his every move, waiting for a misstep. The damp smell of mold filled his nostrils, mingling with a sickly sweet odor, like rotting flowers. With every rung he climbed, the presence seemed to grow heavier, as if it were pulling him back down. His hands slipped, his feet faltered, but he forced himself onward. He could almost see the faint light from the top of the shaft, a tiny beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. But as he reached for the next rung, something cold and weighty pressed against his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. His blood ran cold. "It's touching me." The weight grew heavier, pressing down as if trying to force him off the ladder. He felt paralyzed, his body betraying him as fear took over. In that moment, the scream echoed again. This time, directly in his ear, high-pitched and unearthly, a sound filled with anger and agony. That was enough to snap him out of his paralysis. With a primal scream of his own, he wrenched himself free of the invisible hold and scrambled up the ladder. As he climbed, he realized he was losing sight of the light above. It was as if something was closing it off, covering the exit and trapping him in the darkness. Desperate, he pushed on, gasping for air as he reached the first balcony, where he threw himself against the door, slamming it open and collapsing on the ground above. He was free, but as he lay there, panting, he heard it one last time. A long, drawn-out scream rising from the depths below, filled with rage and despair, as if vowing revenge. In the days that followed, Alex tried to put the experience behind him. But the memory of the shadows, the chilling presence, and that scream haunted him like a nightmare he couldn't shake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the writhing shadows, heard the blood-curdling scream, felt the weight pressing down on him, suffocating him with its malevolent intent. At first, he dismissed the memories as tricks of his mind, remnants of an adrenaline-fueled scare. But then, the strange occurrences began. It started with small things. Lights flickering, objects moving from where he had left them. An inexplicable chill in his apartment. He could hear faint whispers when he was alone, voices murmuring his name, echoing from unseen places. At night, he dreamed of the tunnel, of being trapped in the darkness with those twisted shadows reaching for him. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, the lights went out. Alex felt a familiar chill creep over him, and in the darkness, he could feel the presence again. The same weight, the same cold dread, as if the thing from the shaft had followed him home. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Trembling, he checked the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. The message read, "You shouldn't have come alone." Heart pounding, Alex dropped the phone, his mind racing. How could this be happening? Was it Dmitri, somehow playing a sick joke? Or had he truly brought something back with him from the depths? A cold breeze swept through the room, and in the corner of his eye, he saw them, the shadows shifting on his walls, forming the familiar twisted figures. They had come for him. Desperation drove Alex to seek help. He reached out to Dmitri, who had finally resurfaced after days of silence, claiming he'd been unwell and unable to communicate. When Alex explained what had happened, Dmitri's face turned pale. He listened carefully, his expression grave, before sharing a chilling piece of folklore that underground explorers knew all too well. "There's an old story," Dmitri began, his voice barely above a whisper. "They say the tunnels are cursed. People who venture too deep without respect. They awaken things. Spirits, memories of the dead, shadows of people who never made it out. They cling to those who disturb them, following them back to the surface." Alex shuddered, realizing his mistakes had not only broken the rules of the underground, but had also triggered something dark and ancient, something beyond his understanding. Dmitri told him there was one way to rid himself of the curse. He would need to return to the shaft, bring an offering, and beg for forgiveness. Terrified but left with no choice, Alex prepared himself. That night, he returned to the ventilation shaft alone, carrying a small lantern, a handful of offerings, incense, flowers, and a coin for the dead. The descent was slow and torturous, every creak of the ladder echoing in the silence. When he reached the bottom, he placed the offerings on the cold ground and whispered an apology, pleading for the spirits to release him. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only silence. And then, The shadows appeared again, swirling around him, watching, waiting. But this time they didn't reach for him. Instead, he heard a whisper in his ear, a voice soft and sinister. Leave and never return. He scrambled up the ladder, heart pounding, refusing to look back. As he reached the surface and closed the shaft behind him, he felt the weight lift, the oppressive presence finally fading. Alex never returned to the tunnels. But every so often, he would hear a faint scream echoing in the distance, a reminder of the spirits he had disturbed, and a warning to never forget the darkness lurking beneath the city. Even after his ritual of apology in the tunnels, Alex found that the darkness from below hadn't truly left him. He could still feel an inexplicable chill at odd times, and shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of his vision, as if they were watching, waiting. Every night, he woke up drenched in sweat, haunted by nightmares of being trapped in the ventilation shaft with those shadowy figures closing in. One evening, Alex was working late, going through some old notes from his underground explorations. As he flipped through his journal, he noticed strange markings on one of the pages, symbols he was certain he hadn't written. They looked like crude, twisted figures, shapes that reminded him of the shadowy entities he'd seen below. The figures seemed to dance across the page, growing darker and more defined the longer he stared. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was a message from Dmitri. "I need to talk to you. Something's wrong. Meet me at the usual place." A chill ran down Alex's spine. He hadn't spoken to Dmitri since his return to the tunnels, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face whatever Dmitri had to say. But the urgency in the message was clear, and Alex knew he couldn't ignore it. He grabbed his coat and left, his mind racing with questions. Little did he know, this meeting would bring him face to face with an even darker truth. They met at a small cafe near the train tracks, a place they often used as a meeting point before their underground excursions. Dmitri was already there, looking more haggard than Alex had ever seen him. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken and hollow, as if he hadn't slept in days. Dmitri wasted no time with pleasantries. "I tried to warn you," he said, his voice low and tense. "You never should have gone down there alone." Alex tried to brush it off, but the unease in Dmitri's gaze made it impossible. "I did the ritual, Dmitri. I apologized, left an offering. Why is this still happening?" Dmitri leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "The ritual, it's not a guarantee. There are things down there, Alex, old things, ancient spirits that don't forgive easily. They attach themselves to you, waiting for a sign of weakness. You may have done the ritual, but I don't think they've let go." Alex's stomach twisted with fear. "What does that mean?" Dmitri's gaze was dark and foreboding. "It means they're still with you, Alex, and they're waiting." Before Alex could respond, Dmitri pulled something out of his pocket, a small, crumpled photograph. It was a black and white image of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her eyes dark and hollow, her expression twisted with anguish. She looked like one of the shadows Alex had seen in the tunnel, a figure frozen in eternal suffering. Who is this?" Alex stammered, feeling an unnatural dread settle over him. Dmitri sighed. "She's one of them, the souls trapped in the tunnels. Some say she was a woman who went mad and threw herself into one of the shafts decades ago. Others say she was murdered, but her spirit never left. She's one of the ones who attaches herself to those who enter without respect." The realization hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He recognized her face. She was the source of the scream he'd heard that night, the spirit that had been haunting him ever since. But why had she chosen him? And worse, what did she want from him? After his encounter with Dmitri, Alex's life took a darker turn. The woman from the photograph began appearing in his dreams, her hollow eyes following him, her voice echoing in the silence. Each night, the dreams grew more vivid, more terrifying. He would find himself back in the tunnels, the walls closing in around him, the shadows creeping closer, whispering his name. But it wasn't just dreams. During the day, he began experiencing strange phenomena. Objects in his apartment would move on their own. Lights flickered for no reason. His own reflection seemed distorted, as if something lurked behind him, just out of sight. The woman's face would appear in mirrors and windows, her expression a mix of anger and sorrow. One night, he woke up to find himself standing in the hallway of his building, his feet dirty as if he had been outside. He had no memory of leaving his bed, no recollection of how he got there. It was as if something had taken control, leading him somewhere in his sleep. Desperate and terrified, Alex reached out to a paranormal investigator, a woman named Elena who had experience with hauntings and spiritual disturbances. She agreed to visit his apartment, hoping to uncover the source of the haunting and put an end to it. But neither of them was prepared for what they would find. Elena arrived the next evening, carrying an assortment of strange tools and protective charms. She moved through Alex's apartment, lighting sage, sprinkling salt, and whispering incantations. Alex followed her, desperate for answers, hoping that this ritual would finally rid him of the haunting. As they worked, Elena began to sense the presence in the apartment. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her intuition, and felt an overwhelming wave of anger and sorrow. "There's something here," she said, her voice trembling. "A spirit, a woman. She's trapped, but she's angry. She feels betrayed, abandoned." Alex felt a chill run through him. "Can you make her leave?" Elena hesitated. "Spirits like her don't leave easily. They're bound to this world by unfinished business or deep pain. We need to find out what she wants." She instructed Alex to sit in the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of salt, while she conducted a ritual to make contact with the spirit. As she chanted, a strange, suffocating cold settled over the room. The lights dimmed, and shadows seemed to move along the walls, swirling around them. Then, a voice filled the air, soft, ghostly, filled with bitterness. "He abandoned me. He left me to die." Alex's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't Elena's. It was the woman's. Elena's eyes flew open, her face pale. She's talking to you, Alex. She says you abandoned her." Alex was horrified. "I don't know her. I don't know what she's talking about." But the voice continued, cold and accusing. "You left me. You left us all." And then, in a rush of memories, Alex understood. She wasn't accusing him specifically. She was accusing everyone. The tunnels were filled with lost souls, victims of accidents, murders, and despair. She was one of many who had been forgotten, left behind in the dark. And now she wanted revenge. Realizing he had to face the spirit directly to end the haunting, Alex made the most difficult decision of his life. He would return to the tunnels, but this time, he wouldn't be alone. Elena agreed to accompany him, prepared to guide him through a final ritual of release, a ritual that would allow the spirit to find peace. They returned to the ventilation shaft at midnight, the city silent and dark around them. As they descended, the familiar chill returned, and Alex felt the weight of the darkness pressing down on him, heavier than ever before. They reached the bottom, and Elena set up a small altar, lighting candles and placing offerings, a symbolic gesture to appease the spirits. She instructed Alex to sit in front of the altar, close his eyes, and call out to the woman. "Tell her you're sorry," Elena whispered. "Tell her that you're here to help her find peace." With a shaky voice, Alex spoke, his words echoing in the silence. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I didn't understand. But I'm here now, and I'm ready to help you find peace." For a long moment, there was nothing. The air was thick, tense, as if the darkness itself were waiting. And then, he felt it. A presence cold and powerful standing right in front of him. He opened his eyes, and there she was, the woman from the photograph, her face twisted in sorrow. Her hollow eyes met his, filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch across lifetimes. She raised her hand, and for a moment, Alex thought she might touch him. But instead, she reached for the offerings, her form flickering in the candlelight. The shadows around her began to dissipate, dissolving into the darkness. And as she faded, she whispered, "Thank you," and then she was gone, leaving only silence. When Alex and Elena emerged from the tunnel, dawn was breaking over the city. Alex felt an incredible sense of relief. The weight finally lifted. He knew he would never return to the tunnels again, but he also understood that he had helped someone find peace. Yet, as they walked away, Alex couldn't shake a lingering thought. There were others down there, other lost souls trapped in the darkness, waiting for someone to remember them.